Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is Chapter 1. Chapter 1 is essentially an overview of management information systems. It's going to go into some terminology. You're going to go into systems thinking, which I'll explain. And then you'll also learn about some competitive strategies and a value chain analysis at the end. Okay. So as you can see, the first thing I want you to know is the difference between a technology company and a company that uses information and technology. So Amazon, Netflix, Zappos, they all use information systems, but they're not technology companies. So the book just wants you to realize you don't have to necessarily work in technology to be a technological based company or a company that uses technological systems. Like Amazon is a big database user. They have a very big information system, supply chain, a lot of shipments. So just keep that in mind that you don't have to be technology. Netflix, for instance, you know, they have hard copies, but they also have digital. So, all right, so the core drivers of the information age, you know, things are changing. Now you have computers that can do 10 times what computers 10 years ago did. So with that, information is changing. It's not just, you know, the way it used to be. You would take a spreadsheet and you would spend hours analyzing it. You still learn how to do that to get the basis, but now you can use software to analyze a lot more data. So the book just wants you to know, the author wants you to know the difference between information and data. Information is essentially data, but you've analyzed it. You've gotten something from the data. The book says you converted the data into a usable context. So basically, it gives some examples, like who are my best customers. Data is your list of customers. Information is what you garnered from that customer list. You know, maybe sales data, repeat sales data, and any other criteria you have within your, usually you'll have a table or a database. So business intelligence is essentially taking that information and analyzing it on a higher scale, pretty much. You use software. The book says multiple sources. For instance, some businesses still use Excel. Others may want to use a bigger software program like SAP that can give them up-to-date, on-the-minute information, because some companies need information now. They can't wait a week. Business intelligence actually is a class. It's where you'll actually analyze data using software. There's a graduate level course, and then there's a senior level course. I think it's MISY 3310. And then knowledge is what you gain from all of this. So that's just some terminology. Now, the challenge that in information has been departmentalized companies. Essentially, most companies, the way they've been is they have separate departments, and each department pretty much does things its way. You know, this is what works best for us. The problem with that was there was not a lot of communication between. That's where MIS majors came in. They were supposed to be able to create that connection. As opposed to like an IT person who would just work in IT. You know, they do the hardware, the software, things like that. MIS, they actually were supposed to look at the whole picture. So if you look, the next slide, it'll talk about the way it should be. Basically, they all communicate using the same system. A good example of that is Lamar uses a system called Banner. Basically, financial aid can access certain screens in Banner. Finance can access certain screens in Banner. They do two different things. Financial aid handles federal funding for students. They pay finance. Finance is basically who you owe your fees to. And then you have like human resources. Well, they need information too because some employees are students. So all of them need this data, but they all need different parts of it, and some of them need the same parts. So if you have this system where they can all access what they need, that makes it a lot easier. Instead of financial aid having one set of data and finance having another, then you might have problems where finance says you owe money, financial aid says you don't. So, and that's where systems thinking comes in. Basically, when you look at an organization, you don't want to just see the department you work for. You want to see how everything correlates, because something in your department you may realize benefits another department, and that can benefit your business and make you look good. And then if you say you manage a business, you're going to want to know how everything works and how it works together. So other software is SAP. That's what we'll be learning. It's pretty much a very large, it's called Enterprise Resource Planning software. Basically, it encompasses everything in the business, from producing your products to shipping them to ordering raw materials, billing. All of that can be done in SAP. And we'll be going into the production part of SAP. So you'll be producing a product and selling it to a supplier who then sells it to a customer. So it's a little different than what you did in 1373, where you produced a product and actually sold it. But you sold it to your customer. So that's going to be the difference. You're going to actually sell it to a supplier in production. So it'll take a little of adjusting and thinking, but it will make sense when you get to the assignments. So management information systems is basically a business function where you move information across the different departmental areas. And then the business strategy. Let's see. So essentially with business strategies, they encompass a lot of different things. I mean, I'm sure you've covered that before in other classes. Business strategies are basically your plans, goals, objectives, as the PowerPoint says. Some other plans are, in terms of technology, would be planning for downtime. Disaster planning, for example, you have a center in, say, Dallas, and there's maybe a snowstorm or something that comes. If you didn't plan for it, you might have an outage that, as long as things are down, you're losing money. So business strategies that's an example, is something where you plan. And then it gives some examples of types of business strategies. And so basically your strategies have to do with identifying your competitive advantages. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that your competitive advantage is something that you do better than someone else. You may have the same product as someone else, but for some reason yours is perceived as better. So that ties in with your business strategies, because you want your strategies to improve on your competitive advantage. If you have one that maybe somebody else is copying, you want to make sure that yours is better, and you want to make sure you're improving it constantly. A good example is Apple. Apple constantly updates its products, maybe a little too much. And so they also had a first mover advantage. You see in the slide. That's a really good competitive advantage, but it's a short-lived one. You have to keep, that's why the technology industry is constantly putting new products out, because they keep wanting that first mover advantage, because God, it's so easily copied. So that moves into competitive intelligence. Basically gathering information about the competitive environment. The Porter's 5 forces essentially go into the things you can do to maintain your competitive advantage or to create a competitive advantage. And then the 3 generic strategies and the value chain analysis we'll go into. Okay, the Porter's 5 forces, you're going to see that a lot. So it's a good thing to learn. And it's a good thing to remember, because when you get into strategic management, you're going to actually have to create a 5 forces model for a company. Now, there's 5 parts. The main part is the rivalry within the industry, so the competition. And it's surrounded by different things that can affect your power within that industry. Buyer power, the more power they have, the more you have to cater to their needs. The less they have, the more you can decide what you sell. It used to be when Ford came out, they could sell, they basically said you can have any color you want as long as it's black. That meant they could basically sell them the product because they were the only ones at the time who really had the vehicles. But as more competition came in, Ford started to have financial issues because they weren't pushing products the customers wanted, they were pushing their product on the customer. So buyer power increased in the automobile industry to where now they're having to cater to what customers want. So that's where you had to change to keep your competitive advantage. Supplier power, basically power of suppliers. Within the, it can affect your competitiveness based on the fact that you can increase your prices because, or you actually increase how much you profit. Because if you're in an industry where prices are kind of set, where people aren't willing to pay any more than they already do, you're going to have problems if the supplies go up in price. And if you don't have a lot of leeway with the suppliers, like if they have the power, they can just cut you off, you're going to lose money because you're going to have to pay their price, but you're not going to be able to increase your prices. An example where supplier power was decreased is Walmart. I'm sure you've heard that before, where they kind of made it to where they decide what they sell and you're going to sell at their price. Threat of substitute products, like I said, that's strong in the technology industry. Both these, the two here can have gray areas. The threat of substitute products, you can have, you may be in an industry where there's a lot of substitutes, but there's going to be 1 or 2 that most people buy. Kind of like technology. Most people buy Apple or Microsoft, but there's a lot of technology. I mean, you have Asus, Lenovo, Android's starting to put out some models. I mean, they're an operating system, but they have a lot of different technology that they're on. But yet most people tend to prefer Apple's operating system and Microsoft's. And the problem with that is that while there's a lot of threat products, they don't seem to lose as much market share. They still seem to keep it. It's just because they're perceived as better. And so that's basically how you keep your competitive advantages, by being perceived as either more high quality or you have something the others don't. Like Apple has their applications. Now the threat of new entrants, that can also be gray, because like in the food industry, you have threat of new entrants. It's the threat of new entrants is high because it doesn't cost a lot to open a fast food place as it would the cost to open, like say a Walmart, or like say an HEB or something like that. Those are going to have a lot more money to invest in opening it as opposed to just opening a little burger place or something. But the thing is, in that industry, most of the market share goes to McDonald's, Burger King, and I think it's Jack in the Box. And then there's others who kind of make up the rest. So while there is a threat of new entrants in that industry, it's hard to really gain a lot of the market share to really be a threat. And the book gives you an example of the airline industry. I think that's on, and it goes all through this, and then on page 18, you'll have the airline industry if you want to go through that, where it kind of gives you a few more examples of the different parts of the Porter's 5 forces. So essentially with this, you're going to analyze a company and you'll go, what is the buyer power in this industry? What is the threat of substitutes in this industry? Examples, airline industry, the buyer power is high because customers have many airlines to choose from. and supplier power is high because there's limited companies that actually make plane parts. So that's basically how you analyze the 4 to 5 forces. Now, 3 generic strategies. Essentially, using the 5 forces, you're going to try to develop a strategy. You can either have a focus strategy where your market's narrow, or you can have a cost leadership or a differentiation strategy. In terms of examples, let's see. Up here, most of you probably know Walmart, McDonald's. Over here, you would have a high cost like Neiman Marcus. So essentially, Neiman Marcus has to differentiate their product, maybe be seen as high quality, big brand names, whereas over here, they want the lowest price. So McDonald's always tries to be a cost leader, for example. If they have a dollar menu, Burger King's probably got a dollar menu, which they do now, and so does Jack in the Box. Now, in the niche market, you actually can have 2 areas. Payless, for example, they're a narrow market because they just sell shoes, but they're low cost. Whereas Tiffany & Company is a narrow market. They sell specific things, but they're high cost. So you still have 2 areas down here, but they're both considered where they have to focus on their specific products and their strengths, which you'll see when we get into value chain analysis. And let's see. All right, so value chain analysis essentially looks at what business processes add value. And so if you look here, this is a value chain analysis. So basically, they look at each of the support value activities and the primary value activities. Now, let's see. So this part right here is operations. This part's inbound logistics, outbound logistics, marketing, sales, and service. And then, okay, and so here basically technology, how it adds to your business, research development. For example, you have Barnes & Noble. Their technology development probably is a big portion of their business right now. Even though they spend a lot of money on it, they would have ended up like Borders if they hadn't done Nanook. So essentially what this tells you, and you're not going to do a value chain analysis in this class, but you are going to do one when you get to strategic management, and you'll have a little more. Basically, this class you'll just learn how to read it. Later on, you'll actually learn how to make one. So for this class, just focus on understanding it. Because if you see here, it kind of pulls in the 5 forces. And essentially, the way you read it is you look at what parts are your strengths and what parts are your weaknesses. And then you decide either I improve my weaknesses or I build on my strengths. And that you're going to use to compete in your market. So essentially, that's how those all tie in together. So here you can see that procurement's a big part of your business. It adds a lot of value, mainly because you procure your product, you sell it. You can improve on that. You can actually use technology to improve on that. Or you can look at this and say, my service after the sales doesn't add a lot of value. How can I improve that? Or maybe how we receive and store raw materials, how can we improve that? Because that's relatively low compared to procurement, yet they tend to go together. So maybe you could use technology here in order to improve your processes and, of course, make money. So basically analyze this to try and improve business processes to increase profits. And that is it for chapter 1. It's just an overview chapter. I would recommend looking at the chart on page 24. It's the overview of business-driven information systems. It's an overview of the chapter. It's good because it can kind of give you an idea of what each of the chapters are going to build on. Like our first test is just going to be on business-driven MIS. It's going to be on decision processes, e-business, ethics, information security. Whereas our last test is going to be mostly technical foundations. We'll go into databases, what makes up a database, primary keys. We'll go some into analyzing data. We'll go into networks. So that's all going to be more technical. And then we'll go into Enterprise MIS Chapter 8. So essentially, that's enterprise applications, which is, SAP, ERP, supply chain management, customer relationship management. So just ask questions in the discussion board if you need. There are discussions for each chapter. And then be sure to complete assignment 1 and 2 for the chapter 1. This is the only chapter that has 2 assignments. Just, don't put them off because it is, I think, 50% of your grade.